Today on the Winning with Shopify podcast,
take that burden off of you so you can have some peace of mind and sleep better at night.
hey, we've made a fantastic profit. And then some smart guy turns around and says like, you've made a big loss actually because you haven't paid your taxes yet.
And Shopify Tax is really strong at checkout.
I would say, I don't mind paying a bit more if it makes things easy and simple.
They end up paying sales tax to their supplier. They end up maybe not charging it to their customer. And you can end up in a lot of just a mess there.
I've paid nearly $10 for a coffee. And when I told an American friend of mine out there, they said, $10? Where'd you get that from? That sounds really, really cheap. I was like, are you crazy? Hello and welcome to another episode of the Winning with Shopify podcast. If it's your first time tuning in, welcome to the show. Hit the subscribe button, leave us a review, and please be honest, but also be nice. I think is always something I should say back to that. If you've been tuning in for a while, welcome back. Today we have a very, very exciting topic. We are going to be talking about tax and the financials, which in my experience is one of the biggest reasons businesses start to struggle is they haven't done their sums. So we're going to be talking today about a piece of software called TaxCloud, and I have an amazing guest with me. His name is Ryan from TaxCloud. So Ryan, without further ado, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, Nick. Yeah, great to be here. Really excited to talk about the exciting topic of sales tax.
Well, I was joking with Ryan before we hit record as well, and you joke about it being the exciting topic. This is one of to add a bit of fear factor as to why you guys should stay tuned to this. This is one of the biggest reasons businesses go under. They don't do their sums properly. You get to the end of a year and you think, hey, we've made a fantastic profit. And then some smart guy turns around and says like, you've made a big loss actually because you haven't paid your taxes yet. I had that nearly 20 years ago in business when I got my first VAT, my first sales tax, as you guys in the US call it. But for people who are like, right, TaxCloud, are you a bunch of accountants? And is this going to be the worst episode ever? No, you're not. But Ryan, tell us a little bit about what TaxCloud is and why you guys have decided to sponsor and partner with us here at Winning with Shopify.
Yeah. So TaxCloud, we're a sales tax automation platform. We work with, we like to say, with growing e-commerce brands. A large part of our customer base is on Shopify, although we do support across all e-commerce platforms. And we're really here to make sales tax easy for business owners and founders who really don't want to be dealing with sales tax. We take that burden off of you so you can have some peace of mind and sleep better at night. My background, I've been working in e-commerce for a while. Prior to joining TaxCloud, I was at a company called Privy, which I helped run for about 5 years. And so I'm very well attuned to the challenges and all that goes into running a Shopify business. And yeah, excited to talk about my new discovered passion here on sales tax.
Amazing. And for anyone who's like, Privy, what's that? We had you guys on the show before as well. So I don't think yourself was on Ryan. I think it was somebody else from Privy. But and apologies if I've got that wrong. But we had Privy on the show before, which is what obviously has led to your new appointment and a couple other people in the team as well at TaxCloud. I should say as well, guys, that TaxCloud do have an offer for you guys as one of our sponsors. If you head over to taxcloud.com/winning, if you like what Ryan's got to share today and you think, do you know what, this is a nightmare and it can make it so much easier for me, just as Ryan said, head over to taxcloud.com/winning. You get a free onboarding session and probably a bit of VIP treatment as well as one of our listeners. But obviously, I mean, sales tax, as a PPC guy, I've spent so much time dealing with it. Google Merchant Center needs to know all the different taxes, trying to get it right. And then Google goes, no, when I add this product to cart and I get into checkout, it's like, it's different. And the tax isn't the same as what you've told me. So I'm going to disapprove all your ads. It's something that's always affected the work that we do, especially. So it does relate to some of the fun stuff. What's the first thing Shopify store owners should really be thinking about cleaning up in their Shopify stores when it comes to sales tax, especially certainly across the US?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing I always tell people to start out is just first understanding where you actually have what's called in the US nexus. So TaxCloud, we primarily service businesses that are based in the US. So I'll give that perspective, but I think this is applicable to wherever you're selling today. And in the US in particular, we actually have the challenge where every state across the country has their own tax laws, their own tax rules, and different requirements that tell you whether or not you actually have tax obligation in that state. And so this whole idea of understanding where you actually have met the threshold in that state is your first starting point. There's an important consideration when it comes to nexus. There's this idea of physical nexus, and there's an idea of economic nexus. When you're talking about physical, as you may expect, it's based on where you're actually physically located, but it's not always that simple. If you happen to have employees in different states or different areas, that can also trigger physical nexus in that state. Or if you have a warehouse where you're storing product, depending on the state, that could also trigger physical nexus as well. So there's a lot to think about there. And so you start with physical, understanding that. And typically, if you're small and you're just starting out, you'll know the taxes in your state. That's where you have physical nexus. So get registered and start collecting there. The other is economic. Typically, it's based on number of transactions or total revenue. And that will give you a sense of where you're at today. Not to pitch TaxCloud too early in the conversation here. So whether you use TaxCloud or any other tool, generally any sales tax solution is going to offer a free plan where you can connect your Shopify store and get a very quick view of your economic nexus. So we always recommend starting there. Again, TaxCloud's great for it, but there's other tools you can use as well. Connect your store, get your orders in there, and we'll tell you where you have Nexus today. I can also speak to the one other thing I could talk to is the fact that some orders you deal with some exemptions. The if you're selling different products, a lot of people don't know that certain products are taxable and certain aren't. This is where
Mm.
it starts to get really tricky as well.
Yep.
Uh, so that's another thing to think about as well. Both where you have Nexus, also depending on the sort of products you sell, do you actually have to collect taxes on those products? And there's a lot of interesting rules that you'll have to think about when it comes to certain product lines.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you've just brought back a tiny bit of PTSD in my head of when I was in San Francisco and I went into a cafe and compared to the coffee price in the US compared to the UK, I went in and thought, that's quite an expensive coffee price. And they had a coffee called the Gibraltar coffee. I thought, oh, great. There's a little English town in Spain, which is English, British, sorry, in the UK, from the UK. So I went in and ordered that, and I had a minor heart attack going, oh, it's only like half a dollar or a dollar more expensive than the UK. It's a bit pricey. And then they added the state tax, the federal tax. And then this little lady at the till was looking at me with a big smile. And I looked down at the screen on the till and it said, like, what tip would you like to give? And I thought, and it just a minor heart attack of thinking I've paid nearly $10 for a coffee. And when I told an American friend of mine out there, they said, $10? Where'd you get that from? That sounds really, really cheap. I was like, are you crazy? Like, this is
Right.
like, even with the pound to dollar ratio as it was back then. So I think my point being, which I think is a really good reason that you guys should definitely investigate something like TaxCloud rather than, which is the next note on my list, doing it manually. Is I think you've just described really well, Ryan, and done it in a really very actually quite simple kind of broken down way of like, it's really flipping complicated. Our partners at Seguno have released a brand new app for Shopify, and it's called Shopify Connect for Canva. You can essentially look at all of your product images from Shopify directly in Canva and export them straight back. This can save you a lot of time. If you want to find out a bit more about this or go and find the app yourself, you can go to seguno.com/Canva. Enjoy. And I think I joked earlier about my first VAT return in my business. It really scared me because it was like I haven't even looked at VAT. I've been focused on how do I get enough revenue through the door that I can survive at night and buy food and have a roof over my head and this kind of thing, which we all go through when we set up a business. So actually, getting the tax wrong is like just seems like one of the most awful byproducts that you could end up going right. We've just broken even, but actually we've made a loss, like I say, because of the tax. So it's so important, isn't it, to get a system that will make it easy and actually look into some of those things that you've just explained to us about the nexus. Plus, also like some things are exempt. Which, if something is exempt and you're selling it, guys, that's every reason you should know about that thing for sure.
Totally, totally. Yeah, and that's a big one. Like, it's not always really simple for businesses either. Like, we know a lot of Shopify stores might fall into the broad category of selling clothing, right? A clothing and apparel. Well, within that, in some states, if it's athletic clothing or athletic shoes, where kids might be using it, those could be exempt because certain states have those, or in other states they may not be, right? Food is another great example. You mentioned coffee, but there's some states where I think in California that you have to pay taxes on candy, whereas in Texas you may not, so it's all this very intricate stuff that you can think about. You can kind of manually track that yourself, but then there are tools like TaxCloud where we use taxability codes that we kind of have broad taxability codes that we kind of help map products to. And typically we can help handle a lot of that for you. So basically, we're just trying to make sure any of this sort of stuff that you don't even have to think about it, we can just help on that as well. But as you're starting out, definitely something to be thinking about. Do I have exempt products in addition to understanding your nexus for sure?
Well, I mean, it's such a valuable tip actually. Is that it's certainly, as we both say, like is that exempt products? In somebody's Shopify store journey, though, if we go right from the start, what's the point? Do you think people really need to start factoring like an automation system in, as opposed to doing it like there's no alternative to paying the tax and registering the tax, but rather than doing it manually, at what point do you think is a good point to start getting an automated system involved?
Yeah, yeah. This is an interesting evolution we've been seeing right now that I actually think, regardless of where you are in your journey, if you're on Shopify, which I know most of your audience is, you should use Shopify tax for calculation. If you're trying to do calculation for in some kind of manual way, and by calculation I mean at checkout, how do you calculate the actual tax rate? Today, if you're a business on Shopify, I actually think whether you're brand new or growing, you can use Shopify tax today. And Shopify tax is really strong at checkout. And a lot of businesses, particularly businesses that are growing, who maybe are used to in the Shopify ecosystem where the native tools typically can only get you so far on some functionality, and then you'll move to a bigger one. That's a very common use case for brands. Actually, Shopify tax on the calculation side in particular is actually really strong, and we actually encourage businesses to do that. In the not so distant future, Shopify tax hadn't really wasn't as developed, and so brands had to use kind of one of the legacy solutions that are out there. I won't necessarily mention competitors by name, but you'd have to go and install like a pretty pricey app that you would have to able to do calculation and everything else. And that just added an additional cost and really eats into your ROI. So use Shopify tax at checkout, regardless of where you are in your journey. When it comes to where you need to think about automation beyond Shopify tax is really when it starts coming to getting registered and filing your tax in these different states or regions. And I imagine it would be applicable outside the US as well, where you in the US, if you have Nexus in maybe one or two states, you can probably handle that pretty manually. But when you start to scale beyond these different states, that's where you really want to have a partner to help automate the filing side. And so what we see today is the evolution is it used to be you'd use these legacy, you'd pay for a legacy app to do all of your sales tax needs. Today, it's actually much simpler. You can use Shopify tax for your calculation and then partner with a tool like TaxCloud or one of the more modern sales tax partner tools that will automate the really nitty gritty work of working with the states to handle your filings and be a partner on that sort of thing. And there's a lot we do in the middle to help you track Nexus and deal with the exemptions and all of that as well. But so that's kind of the evolution we see every business going. So in Shopify in particular, like skip the whole manual calculation step, use Shopify tax. And then as you start to scale, I think beyond your first one or two states, that's where you should really look at a tool to help automate on the filing side. It's pretty affordable and you can help automate really quickly and give yourself back a lot of time.
I think it's really good advice, and I think the kind of doing it first state or two yourself manually. I always like the process, whatever the tool is. If you've done it manually yourself, you know what the tool's doing for you, which then means if something's not going right or you've put the wrong setting in, which TaxCloud's great, but I'm sure it's breakable. Like most things, if you give it the wrong information or put the wrong thing in, the other part of this, I would say, which massively comes back to my world as well, is as you say, it's that calculation. So using Shopify taxes to do the calculations for you means that what you're actually feeding into Google Merchant Center for Google Ads, and which is the Google Shopping channel. If anyone's not used that before, on Google Shopping, you have to report back the tax that's going to be added. So using Shopify taxes automates that process. Again, it's totally breakable. I've actually got a list of names. Some of these, well, all of these are my clients, and you guys know who you are. Matthew, Susan, and Janice. You guys have all broken the tax in Shopify, and you know who you are. And I thought I finally got an episode to shout out your name about this. But that's where we ended up doing it manually because there was something breaking within the automation of it. So I think doing it yourself for the first state or two, and then getting a tool to do it for you. Again, I totally second that advice. What happens though? I'm going to throw a few curveballs in, and just FYI, Ryan knew these were coming beforehand, guys. Because actually, we want to make sure the information's right. Because we
Yeah.
can't. We should have said that we can't give financial information, but we can provide the tech to help you do filing and stuff. Some of the curveballs though: digital products, drop shipping goods, and if you offer free shipping, all these things suddenly complicate tax, don't they?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And yeah, like I mean, you mentioned, at TaxCloud, we're always careful to say, we'll give you our advice and learnings from our experience of working with over 2,000 e-commerce brands. But for your particular situation, if you're really in have to make a hard decision about your tax for your business, we certainly always recommend working with a tax professional, a tax lawyer, and those sort of things, just to get that general disclaimer out of the way. The but on some of the situations you're talking about, I think drop shipping is a really common one that comes up, and that's like one of the bigger questions we get. Whereas, who's actually responsible for the tax? Like, you need to be, you're kind of just handling the front end, but you're you're working with a supplier. In those situations, again, it's another. In most cases, it actually ends up being pretty simple for you, which is if you're selling the product, you need to handle the sales tax and you're going to have that obligation. The thing that you need to think about is making sure you're not dealing with sales tax twice. And so what you need to get is the exemption to say, working with your supplier and get registered and say, I'm a certified seller. I'm exempt from tax when I'm buying it from my supplier, knowing that you're going to take care of the sales tax when you're actually selling it to the end customer. So that's like a one where people get really mixed up. They end up paying sales tax to their supplier. They end up then maybe not charging it to their customer, and you can end up in a lot of just a mess there. So that's one to really watch out for if you're kind of doing drop shipping today. Digital goods is another one that can be pretty. I think there's a lot of confusion around where it's like, well, I'm not actually shipping a physical product, so am I actually obligated to charge sales tax? I can speak from the US perspective. This is another great example of the answer is going to be it depends based on the states that you're working in. I know certain states like California will have more generous laws that will say you're actually be exempt in for a lot of these virtual or digital goods, whereas there's other states where they're treated just the same as any other retail transaction.
Mm.
So
And
that's
what
just another.
just
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just to jump in, what's an example of a digital product? If someone's like, we have PDFs on our website that cost $1, is that a digital product? Like, what's classified in that category?
Yeah, I mean, that would be a digital product if you're selling ebooks. Other things like online courses are a great example of that. That's become a growing thing. People who are running courses and trainings and paid subscriptions that way. If you're selling, one thing to think about we haven't talked yet about is this whole idea of marketplaces. So if you're selling digital products on a marketplace is, think about it as the Amazons or Etsy's of the world. They're actually kind of handling the front end and you're just kind of selling your product through those. It's not like you're owning the transaction in the way that you are with Shopify. Actually, even the shop app, if you're on Shopify and selling through the shop app and people are discovering you there, that's also considered a marketplace. And I bring up marketplaces because if you're selling through there, generally the marketplace is actually handling the sales tax calculation and filing on your behalf. So those orders you actually don't have to worry about filing for or collecting. So that's where it starts to get a little tricky as well. So if you're selling directly through your store for those sort of things, generally you will have to collect sales tax. If you're working through a marketplace, generally they're going to handle that for you. So it's all that kind of intricate stuff that you got to be thinking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
when it comes to those as well.
And I think actually, and I didn't think about this before we recorded, but just talking about marketplaces for a second, I just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, Yoast. They are the go-to tool for getting your content SEO ready and Google loved. From keywords to readability and those all-important meta tags, which I know a lot about, Yoast makes it easy. Right now, our listeners can get 15% off all WordPress purchases if you use the Yoast plugin on WordPress, and also on monthly Shopify plans for your first 6 months. Just use the code WWS15, so WWS15 at checkout at yoast.com. That's WWS15, 15% off for better visibility, more clicks, and a healthier website. Let Yoast handle the SEO so you can focus on what you do best. Now, back to the show. Feedback we get a lot from a lot of the big Etsy and Amazon type marketplaces. People often say, like, it's hard enough trying to make a profit on my product. I can't afford to like sell it on there at the price they want me to competitively. But actually, when you start to factor in that they're handling the tax for you, not always. Again, speak to financial professionals to find out exactly what's happening under the hood. But if in that scenario they are looking after the tax for you, well, you can factor that in and say, all right, well, when I'm having to pay a sales tax over here, I'm not having to pay it on Amazon, for example. Well, actually, that means that Amazon's, whatever their fee is, I can discount that bit because I have to pay it to the government or state or whatever, either way, whether I'm
Yeah.
doing it directly or they're doing it on my behalf, which actually means the economics of it start to look a little bit more attractive. So definitely something to consider with the financials.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. I think there's all the pros and cons of certain marketplaces. We see brands that are selling on like large marketplaces like the Amazons of the world. We also see ones that are selling through more like verticalized niche marketplaces where generally the terms might be a little bit more beneficial to them as well. But yeah, that's just it's a big consideration. And the big thing about marketplaces to know is you all the sales tax will be handled through those. But generally, there are still some states, if you're selling in the US, where you at least want to still have visibility of those marketplace orders because those still can count towards that nexus I was talking about before. And so, another example of if you're just using, through like a Shopify tax, for example, well, Shopify is going to help you track all of your Shopify orders, but how do you make sure you're also tracking your orders through all your marketplaces? This is another example where using a third-party tool can be beneficial to help you consolidate your orders, whether it's through marketplaces in Shopify, or if you're doing invoicing through a QuickBooks or something like that. All of
Yeah.
these can have tax obligations, and being able to centralize that through a tool can be really important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's a really good point where having run a Shopify business before and tried to like start selling throughout Europe and across into the US, suddenly then we mentioned this earlier already, like having those cross border things, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in a moment. But even the cross borders, like it gets so complicated that actually just to go, this product is £100 or €100 or $100. That's what I'm selling it at. And then you have something that just says, and here's the economics of how that works from. So then you go, okay, off the £100, dollars, euros that I'm going to receive from the customer for this product, do I factor shipping in or not? What margin have I actually got on this thing? I think it's amazing. Even the business we ran, which was bamboo sunglasses, looking at the bamboo sunglasses, saying, right, it's what between $1 and $2 to buy a pair of sunglasses. By the time I'd paid the import duty, the shipping cost, put them in a warehouse, like we used our office, but it's still physical space that the business is paying for at some point. All of those things going, all right, if I sell them at $20 or £20 per pair, the economics of going from 2 to 20 means I should have a 90% margin. But actually, when I start to factor everything in and we wanted to offer free shipping, I had actually like £2 or £3 or dollars left at the end. And it was like, the economics don't work here. I need to rethink this. So I think having something that like TaxCloud that just gives you that report to say, these are the economics from a tax perspective. And you can say, right, then you can start to just play with the sums on a spreadsheet, can't you? Or even within Shopify and say, if I sell it at this price, those are my economics. But then now we can do the marketing bit. How does that compare to the next person who sells a similar product? What differentiates ours, et cetera, et cetera. But so many businesses, when they get these economics wrong, it's a problem. Obviously, we're not going to ask you to name names, but I know you've got a few examples of actually where this has gone wrong, where brands have made mistakes with this. Give us a few examples of actually where, again, it's like warning signs and nice learnings for the rest of us, so no one follows in this wake.
Yeah. I mean, the most common situation we see for brands who have grown really fast, maybe we've had situations where businesses, maybe they got some media coverage that they weren't expecting that really helped blow things up, or maybe they went into the holidays, Black Friday, Cyber Monday last year, and they get a big spike in sales, or they're just a successful brand that's really grown really fast just because they're doing well and they get some virality on their products, and they just don't think about the dealing with sales tax at all. That's something that happens where it becomes maybe an afterthought for them, or they're like, hey, we'll take care of the states where we have physical nexus, but we'll worry about everything else later. And if you haven't, that at some point you're going to have to deal with it. And so the biggest thing we say is like, deal with it now. Don't wait. Even though it's not something any of us really want to have to deal with. In that situation, there's different paths you'll be able to go. That's definitely a situation where if you're in that, if you know you've reached next, if you come out of this episode and start searching and say, wow, I have an obligation in a lot of states or different regions, and I haven't taken care of that, like that's definitely a situation you should work with a professional. I would certainly recommend that because they can help guide you. There's a lot that you'll want to know there. But typically, based on when you hit these different thresholds, there is a path to getting compliant. It doesn't mean that you'll, be audited and your business will completely fail or anything like that. You just want to go through the proper steps to make sure you get into a good spot. And generally, the different states you'll work with here in the U.S., they're happy to work with you if you come to them in good faith and handle that part of it. But that's certainly another example of where having a tool that can help you get all the reports you need, get all the view of your historicals, and all of that is going to be really important. So that's certainly the most common, and we see that from some large brands that you'd be surprised. You might be surprised that they're in that situation. If you are in that situation, make sure that you're also accounting, have some funds to take care of that at some point. If you're like, we're not going to deal with it, okay, I certainly wouldn't recommend that, but make sure you have
Hmm.
funds because that bill will come
Oh, yeah.
due eventually. So that would be one big one. I can maybe stop there. I don't know if you've run into that at all or seen that, but
We have, yeah. It's one of my catchphrases. I am writing a book, by the way, guys, and I'm not plugging it because it's not going to be ready for at least 10 years. But I'm writing memoirs, and one of the funniest memoirs I've got is there's a small short list of brands, which obviously I'm not going to name by name in the book, but I am going to talk in my book, which is hence why it reminded me of this about my catchphrase, scaling a problem. And I think it's so fundamental that so many businesses are like, wow, this has really taken off. Customers are buying. But actually, I think I've come to learn that over the years that although in the early days the customers buying is the hardest problem to solve, without that you do have nothing. That money comes in and then it starts trickling out into all these different streams, from staff to offices to products to tax to everything else. If you're not getting the customers in, then you have an issue. Once you are getting them in, if you've not done your, I call them the kind of product economics. If you've not done those product economic sums and worked it all out, when you do scale, when, as you say, like, it's interesting you mentioned the press, because normally when someone blows up in the press, that article they've got in the press hasn't actually cost them anything. So from the very very first point, you have the cheapest, like basically free point of marketing, where the CEO got invited on the news and suddenly sales have spiked. And if you are making a loss and you haven't done the economics properly, the loss is going to go from, if you're making a 5% loss and that's currently $5, and you tenfold up, you've now made a $50 loss. And there might be as many other zeros on both of those two sums as you like. So I think the scaling a problem is such an issue. And we've had brands before go, it's all going really well. ROI is great. Like, we're making really good orders and stuff. But we're on the verge of shutting down the whole company. Like, just stop everything. We need to kind of take a step back. I think when the free orders through, I say free as in marketing free, through SEO, through email, through PR, when they're not making your money, it's like, okay, seriously, guys, we need to get a financial advisor in, and obviously someone like TaxCloud is going to help. What are some of the other problems on your list that you guys have seen?
yeah, I mean, the other, so one that's like less high stakes, I would say, that happens a lot is some people, when they get started, they actually are just like, oh, I have a store. They go into their Shopify settings, they see tax, and they just like turn tax collection on
Boring.
everywhere.
Yeah, we'll turn it off. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Or either one. Oh, like turn it off, or if you just turn it on and start collecting. And if you're particularly if you're new, like you don't need to start collecting, and in fact, you shouldn't start collecting until you are at a point where you really need to register with the state. And so that's one thing I would think about as well. I think that's certainly the case in the U.S. that don't start just collecting now, because ultimately you're collecting tax that you don't actually have to file with the state. And so wait till you have Nexus or are approaching Nexus before you actually go and get registered with the states. And that's something we see businesses doing where they're like, I just want to get this over with now and start doing it. And that can put you in a weird situation where you're actually collecting tax that you don't really need to be. And And then
It's just
what you
another thing, isn't it? And it puts your prices up and yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and in some situations, like, you're collecting money from your customers that actually you really shouldn't be, and so it kind of can put you in a bit of a weird, position as well. Um, Other really common one just to speak to is, this one is a little bit more general, but at TaxCloud, we're dealing with a lot of businesses who are switching from other providers. And again, like I really don't present this one as a way of just like bashing other providers, but I think it is good context to learn from where there's it's a world where if you've been paying attention to sales tax for a while, there's like one or two providers maybe 5 years ago that like everyone's like, oh, just use them, and you get locked into these tools and you actually don't realize that there's cheaper alternatives out there, that there's alternatives like TaxCloud where we really put a priority on people and customer support and making sure we're really responsive. um, and that's another big one that like make sure if you have a tool in place today that you're doing your work of looking at all their alternatives that are out there. That's a big one. And tied to that, if you're selling in the US today and you're using a provider, maybe just like a little inside tip I'd give people is to work with a provider who's part of the streamlined sales tax, it's called SST program. This is actually a program where uh, there's certified providers that automatically will file on your behalf. I think it's on 26 states, maybe 20. The numbers has changed a little bit, but you don't get charged when you work with a provider for those states. So we actually pass that savings on to you. There's only, I think, 6 or 7 providers in the US, so it's kind of free filing to deal with. And so if you're working with someone today, ask about that program. That's another mistake we see is people just maybe use a provider who they could be getting that program, or they don't use a provider that's part of it, and
Hmm.
that's just money you're leaving on the table, that you could be taking
Yeah, yeah.
advantage of. So we certainly recommend that as well.
I mean, that's a really, really good tip. I think it is, as you say, money on the table. Why on earth would you want to overpay for this stuff? I don't mind. I would say, I don't mind paying a bit more if it makes things easy and simple. But that it feels like a bit of a box tick just to say to provider, "Are you doing this? No. Well, could you start doing it for me?" I think in the UK as well, like just something to flag about my VAT return because this relates to selling products here, and I know it's similar in the US and it's similar across lots of other states and countries. Is when I first registered for VAT, the thing I hadn't even realized, because again, I was so focused on just getting leads and clients in back in, I'm trying to look at the dates now. It would have been 2008, 2009. I sort of started out in this. But I remember back then I was so busy trying to get clients in, I didn't realize that I could offset tax as well. And again, we're not going to give financial advice, but I would look into that where by collecting tax from my clients, or in your case, everybody, your customers, you can offset some of that tax where you're also spending money in some situations. And certainly here in the UK, every tax return, every business puts in for VAT, value added tax. It's our version of sales tax. We have an extra
Yeah.
word in ours. No one knows why. But by doing that, we can offset some of it. So again, I think even I don't know if you can comment on whether that sort of situation in the US and TaxCloud having that perspective. Actually, going back to one of my earlier questions, doing that calculation of when should I go from DIY and manual to a more automated filing system, actually that was a real factor for me of saying, well, I'm already spending this much per month on tools I'm using, services I'm buying, products I'm buying, computers. There's 20% VAT on all the computers I buy here in the UK. And actually, if I'm buying a MacBook for £1,000, £200 is on top as VAT. I could offset the £200 versus VAT it's coming. So I've just saved £200. I think there's a real way to be tax savvy, I would say, and it's important to have the right data and the right tool like TaxCloud to actually have that information to be able to make some of those decisions.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think in the US, there's a little bit more of kind of offsetting like your other business taxes outside of kind of like general sales tax. I mean, for us, what we really find on the sales tax side in terms of thinking about kind of cost savings and those sort of things are a few of the things we've talked about, right? Understanding your exemption in those products, that's certainly a big part of it, and having a tool that can actually track that stuff. Using a provider that is, we've talked a lot about the additional cost of tax, but then there's an additional cost of using a provider. Now, paying for a tool obviously is going to make your life easier, but definitely do some price comparison out there of these tools and make sure you're not overpaying for the solutions you're using as well. That's why we recommend Shopify Tax, because to a certain threshold, if you're a new business, you actually won't have to pay anything. And then I don't know off the top of my head, but there is some threshold where you will start to have to pay Shopify, but then they cap that expense, right? And then so thinking about the provider and the costs related to that, and then obviously the last part of it is just making sure you stay compliant so that you're not dealing with other penalties after the fact and getting into a bad situation. Those are all kind of the cost related items that generally we're thinking about on the sales tax side, TaxCloud, and
Yeah, yeah.
having a tool that can help automate all of that for you is just going to make your life a lot easier for sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely amazing. And one of the best bits of advice I ever had was, and this is going to sound so simple to you, especially because you've been a CEO, you would have looked at loads of these, is a P&L report, profit and loss. You would not believe how important they are, guys, whether you're running a Shopify business, an agency business, a hair salon, whatever it is, you need a P&L report and you need it regularly. And you're not going to have accurate data if you don't use the right tools for it. The profit and loss, literally, I assume they're the same format all around the world. I use Zero here. The top bit just says all of my income, and that falls in a few buckets. Then there's a big long list, which is really depressing because it's bigger than the income list, and that's the outgoings list. They have to be smaller numbers, or you're not making a profit. But just having access to that, like almost in real time, guys. The difference on my side is that we have a lot of expenses that are like physical receipts, and they all need to be logged by a bookkeeper. But actually, within Shopify, a lot of your receipts can be done almost in real time through a system like TaxCloud to actually say, this is your, I don't know if it's the same phrase in the US, but in the UK, we use the term run rate a lot when we talk about financials. So your run rate right now is how much cash are you making and how much are you burning? And it's like, have you got enough coal to keep that fire going without running out of coal? And that's the profit and loss bit. And so I think having access to that quickly, real time, tax is such a big part of it. I won't moan too much about the tax rates in the UK, but if I was running this business 20 years ago, I'd be far more wealthy and probably have a lot more staff and a bigger office than I have now, and the same income. So
Right.
it's even more important, I think, in the current global climate to keep a really close eye on this.
Yeah, for
But look,
sure.
yeah. But look, Ryan, it's been so good to have you on the show. I really appreciate your time. And if anyone wants to reach out to Ryan and the team, go to taxcloud.com. Again, if you put a /winning on the end, free onboarding session for when you guys decide to make the switch. But Ryan, people can reach out to you guys, have a conversation, ask questions in advance, can't they? If they want to know what's going on and check out the free trial.
Yeah, that's right. We offer a free trial of the tool, 30-day free trial. We also, as I mentioned before, we put a real value on being people first. You can talk to a real person here in the US. As I said, today we service US-based businesses and businesses that are selling into North America. We'll hopefully go global eventually, but we're here to talk. If you're a business, whether you're in a different country or here and just have questions and want to evaluate the tool or just kind of understand a little bit, learn a little bit more, we got a great team here that's happy to talk anytime. Go to taxcloud.com as Nick mentioned there, and we'll be happy to connect. So yeah, really hope this was valuable. Hope we didn't scare people too much, and we're here to be a real partner to help with your sales tax when you're ready for it.
I think sometimes a bit of stress is a good thing. Stress equals action in all good situations, as long as it's in balance. But no, massive thank you, Ryan. I think there's so many things as well that you brought up that we never really talk about on the show. We're so focused on the kind of really fun stuff, which seems fun, but actually it's all pointless doing the meta ads and the Google ads and the email marketing and the launching a Netflix series alongside your brand, like we had somebody on recently as well.
Oh wow.
That's all fun, but actually if you don't get the economics right, you're just heading towards bankruptcy. So no, massive thank you. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nick. Thanks everyone.
Cool. And for everyone listening at home, we are back again next week. TaxCloud are going to be on our website. If you want to go and check them out, there'll be links in the descriptions. And if you have any questions for them at all, or actually if this has sparked a topic of saying, do you know what, this drives me mad, send us an email, hello@winningwithshopify.com, or check out wwspodcast.com. I always at this point say we couldn't keep winningwithshopify.com because our website's on Shopify right now, and a Shopify policy is you can't have the word Shopify in your domain, which is really annoying. But there we go. We are independent, so I can moan about Shopify as much as I like. Thanks for tuning in today, guys. If you haven't already, please leave us a review, hit the subscribe button, and we will see you again next week. Take care. Sales tax is overwhelming. Never mind the stress that comes with a provider that's overpriced, unreliable, or leaves you waiting days to get a reply. TaxCloud is here to tell you there's a better way. They're not just a tool, they're a trusted filing partner for growing Shopify brands. They will work directly with the states on your behalf to handle registrations, filings, and ongoing compliance, so you can stay focused on growing your business. Plus, with a 4.9 star rating on the Shopify App Store, merchants trust TaxCloud to get it right, and you can too. Go ahead and check them out at taxcloud.com/winning. This is exclusive for the Winning with Shopify podcast listeners, and you will get a free migration onboarding service when you decide to make the switch. So that's taxcloud.com/winning.